So, on to our program tonight, and we've called upon Jonathan Way, one of our own members, and a member of the Manassas City Council, formerly with the Planning Commission there, and that's what he does after he retired with 37 years with ExxonMobil in the areas of strategic planning. So I'm going to turn this over to Councilman Way to introduce all of our panelists and get this program going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martha. Is this the mic we're supposed to use, or is this one?
I hear an echo here. So, Jim, how's that coming across? Do we have an echo?
Both are working.
Okay.
Okay.
Your choice.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This presentations tonight will be focusing on the off-budget aspects of discretionary funds, not the worthiness of the recipients of those funds, but rather the mechanics of distribution. But first, in order to put county funds in perspective, you have to ask yourself just what is a discretionary fund? Excuse me. Let's start with the world's biggest discretionary fund, which is about $200 billion or so. It's run by the King of Saudi Arabia, who takes the profits from Aramco, the oil company, and puts them into his private fund and then distributes them downward through the entire economy. The only discipline placed on him is risk of assassination. Then move down a little step to the U.S. federal discretionary funds. Solyndra might be something, a name you've heard, which was a discretionary fund for energy. Tiger funds. Manassas received $25 million in stimulus money, discretionary stimulus money from the Department of Transportation to build the overpass on Wellington Road and to widen Wellington Road. Without that, it would never have been built. You move down the spectrum a little lower to Virginia. Virginia has discretionary funds. They call them discretionary performance incentives. This means we'll give you some money if you do what we say, and you don't do it, we take it back. The governor has an opportunity fund for economic development. There's an Investment Partnership Act. There's the Economic Development Incentive Grant. There's a Clean Energy Manufacturing Incentive Grants. These are all discretionary funds. Then we move down a little further down to the county, and that's the subject of discussion tonight, so I won't go into that. But then we can move down to the city. Manassas City has a discretionary fund. It's about $15,000, and it's used primarily for economic development incentives and recognition of employees. Then finally, you get down to the very bottom of the discretionary funds, my discretionary fund. When my wife sends me to the grocery store, I get to keep the change when I come home, and I can spend it on whatever I want. By now, I'm thoroughly confused with discretionary funds, and I hope you are too, because we have four gentlemen here who will sort this whole thing out for you and explain it and justify it and make it all clear. First is Frank Principe, PW County Supervisor of Woodbridge. Mike Thompson, the head of the Thomas Jefferson Institute of Public Policy. Paul Mosner, the Board of Directors of Action and Community Service, ACTS. And John Gray, a CPA and previously Occoquan Budget Committee. Each speaker will get 12 minutes, except Mr. Principe, who will spend the first couple of minutes explaining the actual mechanics of the Prince William system so that the debate can be better focused. We have a merciless timekeeper there, Ray Beveridge, who will, we don't have any electric shocks or anything, but he can stand up and wave and fuss and whatever he likes when the time comes. So our first speaker tonight is Frank Principe. He is the Prince William County Supervisor for the Woodbridge District, having been elected to his first term in November 2007. He also serves on a number of regional government commissions, including the Council of Governments and the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. He's the owner and managing partner of Crisis Partners International, a consulting firm specializing in crisis management and homeland security planning for governments and companies. He earned his BA in American History and Political Science at the University of California and is a master's candidate at the University of Maryland. He resides in Woodbridge with his wife and twin daughters. Frank, the mic is yours if you like this one or the other one or whatever you like. Turn it off.
You want to grab your notes? Is that it? Is that yours? Good evening. Oh, good evening. All right, make sure everybody's awake here. Well, thank you for having me tonight, John. And hats off to the Committee of 100. I've been coming to Committee of 100 events for a very long time, and I accepted this invitation in large measure because I know the Committee of 100 does it right. And I experienced that firsthand just a few minutes ago when Martha and John were using their watches to time down to the exact start time. They started at 4 minutes, and then it was 3, then it was 2. So we know we have some real precision in the audience here tonight. I want to first sort of preface my remarks and let you know that I speak on behalf of Frank Principe tonight. I have other colleagues on the board who have other opinions and other perspectives that I'm sure they'd love to share with you. And I just want to make sure that you understand that I don't speak tonight on behalf of the Board of Supervisors, nor do I speak on behalf of the county staff, the county executive, for example. So I'm going to share with you my perspective and how this issue rolls out in my particular office and how it all works. In the lead up to this event, I had several folks say, Frank, this is a third rail issue in Prince William County, how we're using local tax dollars. And some of them asked the question, are you crazy for being here tonight? And I said, no. I tell them 3 things, and I want to share those 3 things with you. Number one, there is a lot of misinformation and rumor in the community about the so-called discretionary funds that the supervisors all have, okay? Number 2, I am a strong advocate for transparency in local government, and I believe our residents have every right to know exactly how every single tax dollar is spent here in Prince William. And I want to come to tonight and share that with you from my budget, my perspective, and I believe that we will have a very healthy debate. And I believe that going forward after tonight, we may have some very good ideas to follow up on, and the Board of Supervisors and county staff will consider these ideas as we go forward in our own budget process, culminating in approval of the budget in April. Now, with regard to an overview of the district funds, everybody talks about discretionary funds and a discretionary account. This is a misnomer. There is no line item in our budget called discretionary funds. There used to be, and that may lead to a lot of the confusion. Back in the mid-'80s, there was a line item in the budget that said discretionary funds for the supervisor's office. It no longer exists. Each year, we receive an operational base budget from the county of $335,000, or I should say in the current year. It was $335,000. Give and take a few dollars here and there for each supervisor for differences in salary costs. But generally speaking, the base budget is $335,000, and yes, that includes the $89,000 that each supervisor received in the last fiscal year. Okay, so that $335,000 was last year $89,000 less than it is this year. So the question becomes, of that $335,000, how much of that is carryover? Well, none of that is carryover. That's base budget, okay? However, there was a carryover amount from the last fiscal year to the current fiscal year for my office of $61,000. $61,000, okay? So my total budget for the current fiscal year is $401,000, if my math is correct. Okay, so let me share with you how we go about spending that $401,000. Okay, first off, 70% of the 401 is in salaries and benefits. Each supervisor is now approved for 3 FTEs, full-time equivalents, 3 full-time staff. We previously were at 2.5, and I'll tell you that 0.5 individual worked about 1.3 times, his or her time, and we're not getting any benefits, any healthcare benefits or any other benefits. So we felt as a board justified in taking that, given our 43% population increase in Prince William County, right? We're serving 65,000 residents in each district, to take that 2.5 to 3, and that's the reason for the 89,000. Quite frankly, all or most of the 89 went to the 0.5 staff person and their benefits, okay? So 70% is spent in my office. I'm not speaking for any other supervisor. 70% on salaries and benefits. The other 30% I call operational costs. It's actually 27%. We'll be very precise here. The 27% is spent on office supplies, postage, printing costs. We have to lease our copier and our fax machine. There's contract costs. And community outreach. When we do a town hall or a teletown hall, or we publish a quarterly newsletter, right, or we do a Metro Rail Summit as we did recently in Woodbridge, or a Railvolution program a couple of months ago, or Smart Goes, those things are not free, right? You've got to lease the space, you've got printing costs, you've got lunch if you're offering lunch to the participants. So 27% of that 401 is spent on what I consider to be operational costs that enables me to serve the 65,000 residents of the Woodbridge district. The other 3%. The other 3%, which equates this year to about somewhere between $12,000 and $15,000, is donations to either nonprofits, schools in my district, or Little League and Boy Scouts and Girl Scout troops, community groups. So those donations for my first 4 years in office were capped by myself at $10,000. Okay, so the base budget of $330, spending $10,000, you can do the math. It's a very small amount of the overall budget that we receive as supervisors. Okay. And I establish a set of internal guidelines that we evaluate every single request. And I'm going to tell you, we turn down more requests than we fulfill. And when they ask for a certain amount, they don't always get that amount that they ask for. So the guidelines that I use is A, it has to go to a nonprofit or a Woodbridge school. B, there can be no religious affiliation associated with that nonprofit or school. C, the organization has to be in place for a couple of years. I don't fund startups. I want them to be established, have a strong mission, a board of directors, a set of governance procedures so that we're making a good investment of tax dollars, that it serves Woodbridge residents. I don't give funds, donate funds to private organizations where the benefit, the services are limited to a few number of people. And if you recall my consternation over the $100,000 notice of intent to donate to the Rainbow Riding Club, my feeling was, number one, it's very much a private organization that serves the needs of, and my numbers could be wrong, 40 or 50 individuals. I would much rather give my 3% to an organization like the Red Cross, Salvation Army, who, when your house burns down, they're there for you. It's open to the public. So no private organizations. And money has to be earmarked for a program, not operational costs. We distinguish between programmatic and operational costs. And we typically will not give donations to an organization more than one time a year, okay, unless it's an emergency. Personally, I have no problem with the Board of Supervisors, the individuals, having the authority to allocate funds from their district budget because there are so many worthy causes in this community that never make it into the county government-based budget. There's just no way to be able to address the magnitude of need in this community at a time when, over the last 4 years, we've cut our budget by $148 million and laid off 135 county employees. So there is great need out there that these small funds can do a lot for. Also, for me, the timeliness of the donations is critical as well. If you recall, in the Woodbridge district this past year, Tropical Storm Lee hit, caused the evacuation of 300 individuals from 3 neighborhoods. And we needed some temporary housing for those families, and we were able to put monies towards temporary housing. You also recall that the impact that had on the Axe Food Pantry was to basically close the food pantry because they had no food on the shelves. So we made a contribution to that. So while I've capped each year at 10,000, this particular year it's now at 15,000. So I'm going to need to find a $5,000 in operational savings in order for me to have a balanced budget at the end of the year. And and the size of these contributions are also very important. For the Eagle Scout project or the Girl Scout Silver Award project, a $150 contribution goes a long way to that particular project. And in this case, the last one I did was for an improvement at the Hildebarg Homeless Shelter. You just can't compete. A Boy Scout or a Girl Scout troop cannot compete with the very large nonprofits that are competing for funds in the usual budget approach that we take in the county. And there are checks and balances in this process, quite a number actually. It's not like we can simply stroke a check and, in the guise of night, hand over a contribution to an organization. That's not it at all. I believe each individual supervisor has their own internal guidelines, and we are all required to announce our intent to donate at a public meeting that's on TV, that's on a published agenda, right? All requests, without exception, are reviewed by the county attorney's office. And yes, the county attorney has said, that's probably not an appropriate contribution to make, and that fund and that request is then withdrawn by the supervisor. And of course, it's all voted on by the Board of Supervisors. So there is some vetting process that, as you saw with me recently on the Rainbow Riding Club, there is a vetting process. We're all looking at each other's contributions and matching it up to determine whether or not it's within our own internal guidelines ourselves. Carryover funds. The process of returning unused funds to the general fund is rather new to county budgeting. It was only 7 years ago where we initiated that process of taking unused funds at the end of the year and turning them back to general revenue. Prior to that, for example, social services, if they had money left over at the end of the year, what did they do? Not necessarily social services, but in general, county departments and agencies, they spend it, right? We're going to lose it, so we spend it. And I'm not sure that's the right motivation or incentive to provide a supervisor or a county department in the use of taxpayer funds, right? If there is an opportunity for it to carry over from one year to the next, there's less impulse to spend where there may not be a need to spend initially. I think also carryover funds are important because it gives us the flexibility in emergencies. We had the declared emergency with Tropical Storm Lee. Before that, Hurricane Irene. There's been several emergencies, and we are able to address the needs very quickly. Not a lot of money, but very quickly in this process, as it goes through that process I mentioned. So is this a perfect system? No, not by a long shot. Can it be improved? Absolutely. Let's consider a couple of reforms or a couple of changes to the process as you all consider what your own personal positions are and our organizational positions. Number one, should we adopt a set of guidelines that the supervisors should use in that disbursement of the 3% of those funds? I have a set of guidelines. I know my colleagues have one. We don't have one. We don't have a common set of guidelines. Maybe that's what we need. I don't know. Two, maybe there ought to be a cap or a ceiling on the amount of the reallocation of funds from one year to the next, right? If a supervisor chooses, for example, not to have 3 full-time equivalents, okay, the difference in that salary and benefit costs then becomes a carryover fund, right? So one way to manage that carryover amount is to put a ceiling. You can't carry over more than X dollars from one fiscal year to the other, something to consider. And the other area to consider for reform and change is asking our nonprofits, and this may stir more discussion than the operational funds we're talking about, to move the nonprofits in a process whereby their grant requests are competitive. Right now, some of it's competitive. We're moving in that direction. Any nonprofit that comes forward today in Prince William County has to find a sponsor, not from the Board of Supervisors per se, but from a department. And they are now going through a process. Last year, at my request, all of those nonprofits were asked to sign a memorandum of agreement on how they were going to use the funds that the county gave them. So we're taking some strides here, and making this process competitive, I think, might move us in the direction of more accountability and more transparency on the very limited dollars that we have available. So just in closing, I believe very strongly that the Board of Supervisors, myself included, has been entrusted by our citizens to develop and approve the use of taxpayer funds. We're doing it every day. Our budget that's coming forward in this process this year is just under $1 billion, with a B, $1 billion. So we're talking about, for me, maybe $15,000 out of $1 billion. And the CIP, the Capital Improvement Program, is another $1 billion over 6 years. So that's $2 billion that the Board of Supervisors, and that includes a school allotment, of course, which is 56.7% of the overall appropriations. We're asked to manage $2 billion, and I'm thinking, with maybe some reforms, 3% is, not a lot of money. And we know our communities fairly well, and we are in a position to, particularly in cases of emergency, as we've had this past year, been able to move very quickly in getting the funds into the hands of the people who can make a difference. That concludes my remarks, and I suppose we're going to take Q&A after the speakers? Great. Thank you.
Yes, please feel free to express your approval after each speech. Should have said that. Excuse me. Our second speaker is Mr. Mike Thompson, who is the founder and currently serves as the chairman and president of the Thomas Jefferson Institute for Public Policy, the state's leading Virginia-focused, independent, nonpartisan public policy foundation. Wow, that's a mouthful. He also chaired Governor McDonnell's Issues Committee on Government Reform. Previously, Mr. Thompson owned and managed a direct marketing agency in Springfield and was president of a chain of furniture stores. He serves on the Leadership Council for the National Federation of Independent Businesses, where he's been a member for 34 years. He's also a well-known conservative leader in the state and local Republican Party for some 36 years. And he and his wife have been in Fairfax County residents for 41 years. Mr. Thompson?
Thank you. Thank you. Let me outline some thoughts and talk about some concerns which are more of an image than maybe reality, but image becomes reality a lot of times. Open government and transparent government are today's code words for good government. All of us are here tonight because we believe in good government, and none of us are here to point fingers or to make accusations. But we are here to discuss a matter that has the potential to further taint the image of government in particular and local government in general. Thomas Jefferson said in a letter to Joseph Cabell on February 2nd, 1816, "Man feels that he is a participator in government, in the government of affairs, not merely at an election one day in the year, but every day." We are here tonight because we believe we should participate in government more than on election day. Government is tainted. People simply believe that politicians are on the take and that elected officials set up systems that take advantage of their government positions. You and I both know that from discussions at Rotary clubs, local chambers, at church, in our general life. People just have that general feeling. Indeed, look at what we have found out recently in our Congress. It has been perfectly okay for our congressmen and senators to take actions that in any business would be illegal. That is, to take insider information and use it to buy stocks in companies that were going to be benefited by government action that those congressmen and senators were voting upon. It was part of the deal for being a member of Congress. And none of us, liberal or conservative, Democrat or Republican, knew this was going on. Not one member of Congress ever complained about it. Not one member of Congress took it to the public until a convicted felon who had gone to prison, Jack Abrahoff, brought it up in his recent book and in his media interviews. Then Congress made the change. And the reaction on the street was basically, so what's new? Congress and our elected leaders are corrupt. We know it, but it is what it is. That is a very sad commentary on those we elect to office, those who take our tax money, those who spend our tax money, those who want to get our vote in the future. We expect better and we deserve better. The Washington Post has had a series of recent articles on abuse of congressional and government influence. Indeed, last week, February 8th, the Post carried a front-page article called Close Connections that outlined several instances where congressmen and senators appropriated federal funds that enhanced their personal property values and went to institutions where family members were employed. Again, the article only adds to the terrible reputation that the general public has of politics and politicians. We have accepted the notion that politicians are corrupt, and that is why I'm here tonight, to speak against the Prince William County Board of Supervisors' current policy of spending unused office budgets on local projects without going back through the normal budget process. This policy begs for misrepresentation and misunderstanding by the public, the media, and the relatively new blogging community. Indeed, this policy oozes with the image of potential misuse of public funds, and that is why I firmly believe this policy should change and change immediately. Why does the Board of Supervisors need this policy? It seems to be left over from an era when local government was hidden from the sight of honest people. And when the spotlight was put on this policy, the reaction of our elected officials is to continue it. I find that amazing. Fairfax County, Loudoun County, Arlington County, the city of Alexandria have no similar programs. Your chairman, Corey Stewart, is quoted as saying, "I personally don't do it. I don't know if I ever felt comfortable, even when I was a district supervisor, giving to charitable organizations from a government account. Yet, as far as I know, Chairman Stewart has offered no change in the policy." I find that incredible. The research director of the National Association of Counties has said the number of counties that have these kinds of discretionary funds has significantly dwindled over the past several years because of either actual abuse or perceived abuse. Jim Campbell, the executive director of the Virginia Association of Counties, said discretionary funds are not a common practice in Virginia. But these discretionary funds, regardless of how you want to call them or what technically you want to call them, they're discretionary funds. You and I would refer to them probably in our, over a cup of coffee at the Rotary Club as a slush fund, continue here in Prince William County. It is as if your Board of Supervisors by a small group of manipulators who line their pockets and those of their friends and allies. Now, I know that's not the case here in Prince William County. I know some of your supervisors personally. They're friends, they're allies. But this practice by the supervisors to spend their office account, their extra office account money on very to the image of a 1930s local government, whether it was Chicago, Philadelphia, Kansas City, or some of us are old enough to remember Fairfax County in the late 60s and 70s, where Board of Supervisors got themselves in an awful lot of trouble thanks to the investigative work of Jack Anderson. Some of them went to jail. So I'm here tonight to merely ask your Board of Supervisors and those who came out to discuss this issue tonight, why is it that mature men and women who are perfectly honest and forthright in their personal, business, civic, and church lives set up a system, or in this case, allow a system that was set up in the past to continue, that is asking for ridicule and only adds to the current belief that government and its elected political leaders skate near the line of corruption and sometimes cross that line intentionally or unintentionally? Why add to the image? This policy should be ended immediately. To defend it seems to me to be totally out of touch with the desires of the voters. I believe your supervisors here in Prince William County, in a quiet moment when they sit alone and think about it, understand this policy of having an office slush fund should be ended and unused tax money sent back to the general fund for proper budget review and action. Let me end my remarks to again quote from Thomas Jefferson in the Summary View of the Rights of British America in 1774. The whole art of government consists in the art of being honest. Thank you.
Thank you. Our third speaker is Paul Mosner, who is a graduate of the University of Nebraska and a retired captain in the U.S. Navy. He holds a Master of Public Administration degree from the University of Washington. Following his military career, he spent 6 years as the Executive Director of Action in ACTS, a local nonprofit human service agency affiliated with the United Way. Since his retirement from ACTS, he's served on a variety of nonprofit boards providing housing, health, youth orchestras, human services, ethics reviews, and other services. He resides in the Occoquan district of Prince William County. Mr. Mosner.
Thank you very much, John. Let's see, the congregation will now turn to hymn 612. Anybody need a stretch? We're ready to go. Hi, my name is Paul Mosner, and I've been a resident of Prince William County since 1981, when the Navy sent me to Washington to work in the Pentagon. And Prince William, 3 decades ago, a much different place than it is today. Believe it or not, you could make the, well, some of you know this, by personal experience, you could make the commute into Washington in under a half an hour. Not so today. And while some things change a lot, some things remain the same, right, Jack? Absolutely. One of these items of consistency is apparently what brings us together this evening, in that citizens in Prince William like to hold their local officials to high financial accountability standards, and what's more, we like to jawbone about it. My place on this panel is ostensibly related to the fact that since my retirement from the military in 1991, I have been actively engaged in the nonprofit sector of our community. Most of that activity has been within the narrower realm called human services. As such, I've been an active advocate in approaching county staff and the Board of County Supervisors for a reasonable slice of the annual budget. And from time to time, I have also been involved in petitioning individual supervisors for a contribution to a particular project from their district funds. Sometimes I've been successful, sometimes not. I have asked individual supervisors for small amounts of money to support constituent students from their districts to go to Carnegie Hall to participate in an orchestral competition, which they won, by the way. And I've asked individual supervisors to purchase supporting advertisement and programs for special events to raise funds for client services. And I've asked individual supervisors for their support of annual feeding programs at Thanksgiving. None of these requests was for an exorbitant amount of money, and all of those requests specifically addressed the expected positive outcomes for the people living in the districts of the individual supervisors. So I guess that makes me someone who places some positive value on the system as it exists and has existed for many years. And tonight, we're going to examine that system to see if it meets our needs as citizens even today. Let me share with you some questions that came to my mind and the answers that my research and experience has produced. Some of this will mirror things you've already heard. First, shouldn't all budget decisions go through the county's annual budget process? And the answer is that more than 99% of expenditures decisions do go through a full budget process that consists of presentation by the county staff, public hearings, markup sessions, and a final vote of acceptance or rejection by the Board of County Supervisors. That process includes the setting of district fund amounts each year. However, in a community as large and complex as ours, there will always be events that occur that necessitate unscheduled expenditures after the budget's been accepted in April. For example, as Frank mentioned before, last year's flood in eastern Prince William County, and then the threat of a shutdown of our food bank because of the being swamped by more demand than they had resources on hand to meet. A second question, why doesn't the county set up some kind of centralized contingency fund to deal with that sort of thing? The answer is that there really is such a fund, but the policy of the board has been to save it for really whopper events and keep it lean in consonance with the established sense of fiscal discipline that leads to AAA bond ratings. In addition, there is some confidence in the Board of Supervisors' point of view that the flexibility to deal with smaller, district-specific issues inherent in the district fund system can meet most contingencies. The annual contingency fund, the really big one, is really only $500,000 and represents less than 1/10 of 1% of the county's general fund. A third question, isn't it just simply wrong for individual supervisors to have the discretion to decide by themselves to provide money to outside groups? Well, the answer is sure, that would be wrong. But to do this thing correctly, expenditure of any district funds comes about only after circulation of a notice of intent to contribute that is sent to every member of the board and through the publication of the board agenda to the general public. And that's done not less than 1 week before the regular board meeting, at which all contributions are voted on by the entire board in a recorded vote. A fourth question. This system of supervisors giving money to outside groups appears to not have a place for citizen input, right? Wrong. Citizens are informed of all the prospective expenditures of district funds through that publication of the board agenda. And on top of that, they have the opportunity through the mechanism of citizens' time at the front end of every board meeting to express their support or opposition for proposed contributions. Why does our government even consider giving money to outside groups in the first place? Well, the answer is that Prince William County has long been a community that values the efficiency and the effectiveness of accomplishing community goals through the use of public-private partnerships, especially in the provision of direct services to the citizens of the county. Those services are almost always a function of the full budget process, but occasionally are subject to support from district funds. Whether the outside agency is ACTS or SERVE, the Boys and Girls Clubs, Boys and Girl Scouts, Little Leagues, or graduation celebration committees, no funds are dispersed without the requesting agency putting together detailed expenditure plans and specifying measures to ensure fiscal accountability. The funds expended to support local nonprofit agencies are also really a relatively small percentage of the total of those district funds. District funds also bring to completion projects such as libraries, sidewalks, parks, and athletic fields. Finally, how much money are we really talking about in terms of an annual district fund expenditure? I think Frank gave us a little bit of a hint, but for the period of 2007 through 2011, the average annual expenditure for all 7 districts totaled together was $117,200 per year. Sounds like a lot, but that's out of an annual average budget of $449,400,000. Now, my calculator, and probably yours, only goes out to 8 figures. To do $449,400,000 you need 9 figures. Or you have to be old like me and know how to do long division. I know how to do long division, and I did it. The answer is, if you take that to mathematics, 117.2 over 449,400, you come up with 0.00027%. I think that's an awful lot of positive value coming from a very small piece of the pie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Next speaker is John Gray. John is a graduate of Hofstra University in New York, where he earned a Bachelor of Business Administration in Public Accounting and Finance. He served in the Marine Corps from 1969 to 73 and subsequently worked as a staff auditor for Pete Marwick. In 81, he founded his own CPA accounting firm and has worked as such since then. He has served on numerous social, cultural, governmental, and charitable organizations, ranging from the Prince William Symphony to the Northern Virginia Football Officials Association to the Citizens Road Bond Committee. He and his wife have 4 adult children.
Thank you, and good evening. I'm actually very humbled to be here and to be asked to speak on this subject. I've been working on Supervisor's Budget Committee since 1993, except for 1 year last year when I think it was called a run for office, but I think the results showed it was a little more of a fast walk. But the point is, I've been serving on the Budget Committee since 1993. The reason I serve on it is not because I'm a CPA or a nerd CPA. Most people think most CPAs are nerds. It's because I'm just very intrigued with local government, and I always have been. And the best way to know anything, whether it's a business or government, is to look at the numbers. And obviously, as a CPA, I can read those. And I never wanted to be a CPA growing up. I've had clients ask, "Oh, did you want to be a CPA growing up?" My answer is, nobody grows up wanting to be a CPA. Okay? I actually tripped into it, quite frankly. I was in the Marine Corps, then went to college, and the few other vets who were in college were all going to be famous tax lawyers. We then found the bar, okay, and most of them dropped out after 1 semester. But accounting, I went to the class because that's where everyone else was. I was 4 years older than everybody, but I looked 4 years younger. But they were all taking accounting courses, and I did. It was just very logical the whole way through, so I've always been fascinated by it. But let's talk about discretionary funds, all right? Like I said, I started back in 1993 looking at the budget, and it takes several years to learn the budget. And I think I have a very good handle on it. The point is that discretionary funds, as Frank said, was a specific line item in each supervisor's budget for years. I recall I started on Michelle McQuigg's budget committee in 1993, and looking back at the late 80s, I found that, if I remember correctly, it was at $10,000. The purpose of the discretionary fund was to allow each supervisor to use those funds at his discretion, their discretion, that's why it's called that, to both finish up projects if they want to put flowers out, things like that. The purpose of it, though, was to allow the supervisors not to have to put it through the bid process, okay? It was supposed to be small jobs, but as the county grew, that line item grew. It went from 10,000 to 12,000. In 1993, it was 17,000. It then went to 23, 27. Logically, it had to grow, all right? It stopped being a line item, and I couldn't find that 1 year, okay, when it grew to 49,000, and then it was merged into the rest of the budget. So we lost a little transparency there. The trouble was that, unfortunately, it started getting used for the wrong types of discretion. I completely agree with Frank that the vast majority of the money is used for its intended purpose, and I don't have a problem with that, all right? About 6 years ago, I would say, 5 years ago, I did a FOIA, all right, and one of the supervisors was using the discretionary fund, okay, to pay a political consultant, all right? And I spoke to the supervisor about it, and I said I wasn't going to go anywhere, but that wasn't the intended purpose of it, that was supposed to go for the benefit of the citizens in the district, but it was used for political purposes, for market research, all right? That shouldn't have happened, all right? one of the supervisors who was not reelected emptied their, quote, discretionary account by donating $100,000. This isn't the subject matter here, and I don't want to get into naming names, but the $100,000 that came up a couple of months ago, that's not the first time that's happened. Back in the, I think it was 2004, supervisor donated $100,000 remaining in their discretionary account to the American Red Cross. You can't argue with that. But the question was, why was it used for that? Okay, for that purpose, if they had $100,000. But let's fast forward it to today. Frank spoke about what's called carryover funds. Carryover funds is an actual process, okay? Our year end is June 30th. The only meeting, normally, the only meeting that's held in August is when the supervisors look at the funds that were left over from the last fiscal year and carry them over to the next fiscal year, all right? So let's just look at this at the most recent 2 years, all right? In fiscal 11, June 30th, 2011, rolling over unused funds, the supervisors had $949,000 in their individual accounts that they did not use. That was carried over into fiscal year 2012. And I agree with what Paul says. When you look at the whole grand scheme, it's small dollars. But guess what? $949,000 buys a lot of teachers, buys a lot of police officers, and a lot of human services that have been cut out over the years. Okay? The largest fund had $357,000 in it, and the smallest had $9,800. The only part of those excess funds that taxpayers see is what's contributed to contributions. We don't see anything else. What else is going out? It's just the contributions. And 99% of the contributions nobody has any problem with, but we never see everything else. But the point is, every other, and Frank will attest to this, okay? I'm not putting you on the spot. Every agency in Prince William County is beat to death to not spend the money. The staff does a very hard job in telling them, don't spend the money. We need to carry it over to the forward years. The only agency that doesn't have to give back their unspent money is the Board of Supervisors. Again, at June 30th, 2011, it was $949,000. June 30th, 2010, it was $784,000. All right, that's a big spread. Because there's another discretionary amount of funds, and Frank alluded to it, it's called $89,000 each. In this carryover process, all right, being a nerd CPA, I have to have proof, okay? In 2011, I was going over the carryover funds, and it's like a 50-page document, okay? Well, in any case, I saw a line item identified, quote, and it was buried. It was not transparent. It was not full disclosure. It was intentionally buried so that citizens wouldn't see it. And from what I was told, I was mentioned that only John Gray would find it. I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult, but I'll take it whatever. Point was, a line item called BOCS, Board of County Supervisors, Community Development and Staff Retention, $712,000. Didn't take a CPA to figure out real quick, divide that by 7, and you get $89,000 each. What happened was the supervisors were given a second amount of discretionary funds of $89,000 each. I'm sorry, divide by 8. You get to $89,000 each, all right? The $712,000 was buried in the carryover funds, which is done, like I said, in August. Frankly, and I'll be blunt, when nobody's looking, all right? It was buried inside there. The purpose of it was because the prior week, all right, a lot of staff designations, titles were increased. The titles were changed, and this allowed the supervisors to give those staff people salary increases. My question was, I don't have a problem with that. Staff had been cheated, had been denied bonuses. I didn't mean cheated, I apologize, okay? They were denied salary increases for the prior 2 years, but why did it only apply to magisterial office staff? You can make your own conclusion. I know what mine was, okay? Trouble is, this 712 is in the budget for the next 5 years. Why is it discretionary? Because two of the supervisors at the meeting, one decided to take that, not accept the 89,000 and donate it to one fund. Another supervisor decided that they did not want to take the fund, the 89,000. They donated it to the rainy day fund. And 4 months later, another supervisor said they didn't want the 89,000. My answer was, why didn't it go back to the general fund? Because that's where it originated, came from our tax dollars. My point is, it is discretionary because they had the discretion to do with it what they want. I have no problem if they gave it to the staff as raises, but we should have considered the other 3,000 staff in the general fund and 12,000 teachers in the school division. All right, so I don't want anybody on staff saying I'm picking on them. I'm not. I'm saying that the subject was that it was discretionary. So the supervisors do have discretionary funds of leftover funds when no other agency in the county gets it, all right? They get the $89,000 each, and then there's a third discretionary fund. It's called TRIP funds, TRIP. Does not stand for, going on travel. TRIP is an acronym for Transportation Road Improvement Projects, all right? And it started out at $400,000 per magisterial district. The chairman's office doesn't get it. It's just the magisterial offices. They could use those, and it should be for transportation road improvements, all right? As an example, on the west end, some of those funds are now being used to fix Log Mill Road. On the east end, Mike may use it to put sidewalks in. That's fine. That's not subject to disclosure to taxpayers. We have no idea where that's going. In the current budget, each supervisor will get, if I remember correctly, $233,000. Okay? Again, it's discretionary. Why isn't it showing up? That's my problem. Everything in government starts out with a good intent, and then over time, it starts losing its intended purpose. And that's what's happened with the discretionary funds. They've lost their intended purpose, and it's starting, while most of them are used for the valid purposes, and nobody cares about that, it's those times when it's not used that people start standing up and saying this is wrong. Well, we're getting too much of it when you take a look at that, all right? Supervisors' budgets, fiscal year 2011, the adopted budget was $2.4 million. 1 minute left. Fiscal 12, 3.2, $782,000 increase just in the supervisor's budget. 712 of it is the 89,000 per budget that I was talking about. Okay, there is discretionary funds, and for the most part, it's being used okay, but the numbers are growing, okay, and it's being misused, and that's why I'm opposed for the most part now to discretionary funds. It's lost its purpose, and it's being used. I think it's been referred to as a slush fund. You can call it the earmark. You can call it the state government calls their earmarks budget adjustments. We just call it discretionary funds. It's all the same thing. And my time is up. Thank you.
Jack Kuyumcha in the Occoquan Magisterial District. I just wanted to mention the discretionary funds have been, or however we call them, I'll just use that term loosely, to build sidewalks on Old Bridge Road on the eastern end of the county. And it started back in '79, and we're still building that sidewalk. We've had 5 supervisors that have chunked some of that money out to build that road, the sidewalk in sections. We've had some of our children have perished on that road because of safety issues. So it is a worthy community project. I don't want to make a statement. I just want to ask the panel's perspective on something like that, because we've had supervisors Seafelt, McQuigg, Griggs, Stewart, and May all working on that side, aware of it and working on it. Corey was the only one that didn't spend money on the sidewalk. He left the money there for Mike to take care of, and Mike did spend it, and he is working on that. But there's a continuity of over 3 decades, and then it started because that was a secondary road built with a rural cross-section.
Excuse me, is there a question hiding in there?
Yeah, it's just, what's the value of something like that, that all 5 supervisors continue building that road for safety out of a fund like that? I mean, does that make, the community feels it's a safety issue, and I just ask, just your perspective, is that on that particular aspect? Thank you.
Yes. And you raise a good point. Sidewalks and trails, particularly in Woodbridge, in older parts of Woodbridge, we don't have sidewalk and trail. And we recently did a study of pedestrian injuries and fatalities along Route 1 and determined that we had about, I think it was 17 injuries or fatalities since I've been in office. And they cluster at 2 points along Route 1. And we're going to be looking very hard at using both the unallocated funds as well as the TRIP funds and multiple other sources, by the way, to look at constructing sidewalks and streetlights and crosswalks along Route 1 to deal effectively with pedestrian injury and fatality issue that we know we have. So in that regard, and due respect to my colleague here, I believe that these funds actually provide us as a community with a very good reputation, a very good brand, because we're using these funds to improve pedestrian safety, to underwrite the cost of an Eagle Scout project, or to put food back on the shelves of food pantries that are closed because of natural disasters. So perspective.
Nobody is questioning the good of the programs. You go down 81, you've got county after county, much poorer than this one, who have floods every spring and whose food bank shelves are empty. You've got a county north of you that has 5 times the budget this one has, and it doesn't have a program like this. Nobody is questioning the good use of the funds. We're questioning why set up a system that can even be questioned in today's world. You can accomplish all of this by doing it open, forthright, and budget it properly. That's what we're saying. Go down 81. Every spring, there are bridges that are washed out. There are food bank shelves that are empty, and those county boards of supervisors are able to take care of it without having a system like this one has. It just is wrought with questions.
Please.
Jack, that leads exactly into my point when I said that it's supposed to be used for the benefit of the citizens, and I don't have a problem with that. What's tragic is been trying to build that sidewalk since 1979. I've lived in the same house for 25 years, and I live in Occoquan. Why is it taking that long to do it? Why did it cost, to my knowledge, 3 people's lives, people who were trying to cross the road? Okay? That's tragic by itself. Instead of, exactly as Mike said, why isn't this open? Why isn't it done away? Because the funds are being used for things that it should not be used for. It needs to be open and it needs to be transparent, and it's not open anymore. It's not transparent, and it's only getting worse. But I completely agree with you.
I'd like to take just a second to follow-up question on this. Sidewalks are capital maintenance or capital improvements.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it an unusual thing to try to fund capital budget out of slush fund money?
Yeah, I agree, but the county has done it. In the current budget, in those carryover funds, there was a line item for $7.8 million. Now, I compare, the way to follow is you compare last year to this year, see what keeps getting carried forward. And out of the general fund, okay, last year, $7.8 million was a new reserve, okay, it was just identified as transportation reserve, and it was just until I saw the CIP this year that 7.9, which is, again, general fund, which should be spent providing the services that taxpayers want. That $7.8 million is being used to fund the road improvement of not Log Mill, I said that wrong. I have it on my notes here. $7.8 million is being used, allocated in the current fiscal year, all to be used for the Lytton Hall - Fitzwater Drive Route 28 improvements. That's a capital improvement being funded out of the general fund, and the county is doing that more and more and more. If you want to know why social services, human services, education, things like that are being squeezed, it's because we don't have the capital funds to allocate it, but they're being paid for through the general fund, and I just think that is just absolutely wrong. If we can't afford a $28 million police station right now, we can't afford it, but we're going to fund it, but it's going to be at the cost of human services, teachers' education. We're back at the lowest level there. Folks, we got to admit, we do not have a world-class education system. We're paying for it in the sense that we can't fund it from the general fund, Okay, but that's outside the scope of this subject.
Hi, I'm Nancy Beers. I'm a resident of the Coles District now. My question is directed more toward Paul and as a representative of nonprofits. I question why nonprofits in their list of contributors always will put, supervisor XYZ or something made a donation, in this category or something like that, and why it's not listed as, the taxpayers of Prince William County. Could you address that?
It's a good point. I guess it's because we're trying to be very specific as to who specifically was asked for money and who came forward with the money, but that's a point to take back to them, and I will do that. And I'll do that, by the way, just so you know, there is, my associations with nonprofits goes to a whole bunch of them through something that's called the Coalition for Human Services, and also through my work with, as the director of the Regional Council for the United Way. We've got some 40-plus agencies in the area, and so that sensitivity is something that I think we can certainly pass back. And quite frequently, people will say the money came from Prince William County or from the cities.
Al Alborn, and thank you for coming today. I have the highest regard for our Board of County Supervisors, our chairman, and our county government, and believe that everything they do is for the right reasons. However, the appearance of impropriety is what has always bothered me. The occasional 10K to a private art group, perhaps, 100K to a family group or something like that. My issue is there appears to be an insensitivity on the board in general for reform to respond to what is the appearance of impropriety. Even if people are following the rules, giving money in good faith, it just doesn't look right to the people whose pockets it comes out of. Do you believe that there's any hope for our board to actually respond to some of your suggestions and perhaps to, this is directed to Supervisor Principe, to perhaps respond to some of the citizen concerns and some of your ideas in the next year?
That's an easy one, yes. Yes, I do believe the Board of Supervisors has been sensitized to the concerns surrounding the donation of taxpayer dollars to various nonprofits. We're in the middle of our budget process this year, and I would suspect that we will see some reforms. We've seen them in past years. I think we'll continue to see them. The fact that the nonprofits today that go through the county budget process must sign a memorandum of agreement that speaks directly to how the funds are going to be spent, over what period of time, et cetera. That is something that just started in the last year or two. The fact that now you must go through a department sponsor. So if you're a human service nonprofit, you've got to go through social services or CSB or something of that. So I think we're taking steps in the right direction. The question is, how quickly will we get there? And hopefully they will consider, a common set of guidelines or a ceiling on the reallocation of funds each year, or some other method or process to ensure the full transparency of what it is we're doing with your dollars and my dollars, because I'm a taxpayer as well. It's kind of interesting, though, and I'm going to take a little jab at my friend John Gray, is he says, we talk about the need for transparency in government and knowing exactly where these funds are going, but he cited chapter and verse on exactly what funds are in the budget and where they were going. I mean, quite frankly, maybe better than I could. And he is a true expert. So there is a public process here. And anytime you're interested in my contributions to a nonprofit, how I'm spending your tax dollars, I want you to pick up the phone and call me. I would be happy to discuss that with you.
Can I
If
take on
the vast
a
majority of counties have set up a system that people can have a better feeling about, why do you keep a system in place that people question? That's what I don't understand. You wouldn't do it in your professional life. You wouldn't do it in your personal life. You wouldn't do it at your Rotary Club. You wouldn't do it at your church. But somehow you seem to think, we did it yesterday, we're going to do it tomorrow. It's okay. and we're doing it for all the right reasons, and so you can spend the money this way. Why don't you just solve it, and these people would have something else to do with their evening? They wouldn't come out and worry about it.
Can I take, just to build up, and this really kind of relates back to your question, and then building on what Frank said. I just want to make sure that we, in the discussion of all this, that we parse these into the right boxes. An awful lot of what we've talked about here has been things that have to do with capital improvements and all that other, and we're talking millions and millions of dollars. The things that have been coming back to the nonprofits that have been doing basically human service work in the community, that come as extras, are really the things that add up to probably less than $100,000 for a whole year, from a grand total of 7 district supervisors. So it is a smaller chunk per person, and we're not dealing in huge amounts. The nonprofits do in fact work through the various departments and have for a long time. The MOU process is just a new refinement of that over the last 2 years. And while if you go into contracting language, you can't say things like fees for service, but in reality, monies that have come to agencies to provide bed nights of shelter or hours of domestic violence counseling or whatever it is, have always been a matter of essentially an agreement between a sponsoring department within the county government and the nonprofits to provide those services. And there are reports due that come back that said, for the money you gave us, here are the sorts of things that we've done. Now, that's all a part of the regular budget process. And at one point, I think somebody put a total on there somewhere around 2.8 million, and that's probably fairly accurate. But the amount of money that was here sort of essentially saying it's helpful is that small amount of money that can come out of district funds that a supervisor can use some discretion with when they see a particular need that's important to them and to their constituents. Primarily, that has to be to the benefit of their constituents before they'll even consider it.
Mr. Gray?
Frank, I'll be Dan Aykroyd, you could be Jane Curtin, right? Frank, no, I wasn't going to say it, and everybody was going to laugh. Okay, let me respond back to yours. All right, you may say that was transparent. Okay, what I'm talking about is the $712,000. That was a line item in August. All right, it was not transparent. Yes, it was there. Okay, but nobody was going to bring it up. It was like catch us if you can. Okay, nobody spoke about it beforehand. It was only when I found out about it a couple of days before, when the budget, when the notice came out on Friday. Okay. A couple of emails, a couple of phone calls. It didn't take hard to find it out, okay? All right? It was only then, all right, when I started sending emails, all right, when it became noticed. Nobody was going to, Frank, I don't believe anybody was going to stand up and say, could we please explain to the public what this $712,000 is? Oh, by the way, for the next 5 years, so it's going to cost them $3.5 million. That's not transparency to me. That's catch me if you can.
Thank you. I'd like to turn back to the audience now for the next question.
Okay, first off, I just want to say thank you, all of y'all, for coming out tonight. It's been a very interesting topic. I think it's something that needs to be addressed more with the taxpayers. We are talking about our money. Mr. Principe, my question would be to you. I liked your ideas. How can we go about making a change with your fellow board members, getting citizens involved, having citizens involved in a new process? This is something that, you know, with tighter times and constraints, we really do need to look at. And there does need to, you know, I'm a lifelong resident of this county. Nobody loves this county more than I do. But this has to, you know, times have to come, they just have to change. I mean, we can't afford to continue to do this. So how can we really get the ball moving on that? And the other thing I'd like to say with regards to the ongoing work down in the Woodbridge area or along Route 1, Supervisor Stirrup, we've just gotten new crosswalks, pedestrian lights. This project was done, I don't know if it was done out of TRIP funds, but it was done in less than a year. It's a magnificent project. Unfortunately, people don't use the crosswalks.
Great question. How do we affect change? How do we influence a change in the in this process we're talking about. And you know it as well as I do because you're an advocate. And so let me just throw out a couple of reminders. First off, I believe each supervisor, myself included, have a budget committee. And it's a half dozen, 7, 8 individuals, private individuals, who are poring over all 800 pages of the budget. And we start in January and we go all the way to April and we do it together as a team. And we see every line item in every department and we discuss it and we bring forward recommendations. So to the extent that a supervisor has a budget committee, asked to volunteer to be on that committee and bring forward these recommendations through the budget committee process, number one. Number two, just about every Tuesday at 2 o'clock and 7:30, we have citizen time. We invite you to come out and speak for up to 3 minutes about any topic that you choose to that's not already on the agenda. And that is an opportune time to come forward and talk about what you believe to be the reforms and changes that are necessary to ensure that full transparency you talked about. And then, of course, we will have, as a board, a public hearing on the budget at McCourt in April as part of the budget process. So obviously that'll be posted on the website, and otherwise this is the opportunity for the entire public in Prince William to come forward and provide comments specific to the budget. And obviously many of you are members of other organizations, including Committee of 100. To the extent that it makes sense, approach those other organizations and see whether or not they will develop positions on this particular set of issues, and work through other organizations as well.
It's amazing to me that in order to make what is clearly a rational decision to change this system, the National Association of Counties and the Virginia Association of Counties certainly did not give robust endorsement to this budget process here in Prince William County. They made it very clear that not only is it unusual, but it's becoming less and less throughout the county. Why can't the Board of Supervisors, don't tell these people to go back and go through all this process. Make the change. It's the right change to make. Take the leadership, take it by the scruff of the neck, make the change, and continue to spend the money on good things, but do it in a way that the vast majority of counties in this state and the country are doing. Why should they go out and go to their Rotary clubs and go to their civic organizations and go through this entire process? All you have to do is make the motion and get it done.
Thank you. We have time for one last question.
We've got 2 questions.
Two questions. Two last questions.
Good evening. I'm Janine Lawson, and I challenged Supervisor Covington last year for the Republican nomination for the Brentsville District. And this issue reminded me of some of his campaign mailers. And in this one I'm holding up, it says, Wally supports our local 4-H, the Virginia Soccer Association, Rainbow Therapeutic Riding Center, SERVE, House of Mercy, and on. And Supervisor Principe or Paul, I can't help but ask this question: should there not at least be in this campaign literature some type of disclosure that I think it's fair to say it's implied that these were taxpayer-funded entities that he supports, but yet it's not disclosed on here anywhere. So please address that.
Yeah, I already said that it's not a bad idea, and I will certainly take it to the nonprofits. But you got to take it to Wally.
I think she did, Paul. Take it again.
Let's not have a debate, please. We're asking questions.
I would encourage you to look at my campaign material, and I can tell you my campaign material that doesn't exist, and I'm not going to speak for any of the other supervisors.
Last question.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please, John.
I think one of the other reforms that has to be done is the county has to follow up on these contributions, and there's Zippo follow-up. Once the money is given, I'm not talking the $100 contribution. I'm talking the larger contributions, all right? Again, most of us do not have any problem with a contribution to a charity, a public charity. Public charity is something that if you and I need to use the benefits of what they offer, then it's a public charity. If we have to pay, all right, then it shouldn't be. We give a real estate tax exemption to gun club. It's not an anti-gun statement, folks. Let me finish, all right? To a gun club, all right? Your and my tax dollars support that. The law allows it, all right? And I fought against this law, okay? In the early 90s with Michelle McQuigg, it passed. The point is that if you and I wanted to use those facilities, we can't because we're not a member of it, but we support it. There's no follow-up on the part of the county following up on those taxpayer contributions. And if they're following up on everything else, they should be following up on those charitable contributions. That's what allows the questionable contributions to happen, because for the most part, these are going to go through. You and I discussed, there was a $10,000 contribution was disguised in the name, okay, and it was a, again, I have to be careful in what I'm saying, okay, it was not a right contribution. The name didn't disclose what it was. It was only after I called up the county attorney and I said, this isn't what the name implies, okay, this taxpayer should not be funding this entity that was revoked. And I think, Frank, you alluded to it?
I'm not following it, John.
I'm sorry?
I'm not following you. What contribution are you talking about?
Oh, it was a contribution. It was really to abortion prevention service. Okay, but that wasn't
didn't
the.
go forward.
I'm sorry?
That didn't go forward.
No, it didn't. It didn't go forward because I worked very hard, very quickly to say you can't do this. And the only reason I knew it was because I happened to go to the same church as the person who was asking it, and I fought it at the church also. But the point is that there was no follow-up on it. All right, we've got to have that reform inside there too.
Thank you. Okay, well, two more briefly, please.
Good evening. My name is Greg Reynolds, and I want to thank all of you for coming out this evening and having this panel discussion. And Frank, I want to especially thank you for having the courage, because whether you like it or not, you are representing the Board of Supervisors here. You're not speaking for them, but you are the only supervisor here. So in that way. So thank you very much. For me, this is all about appearances. And I just want to also say that citizens' time is not a very good or effective tool for the budgeting process. Now, when money is not spent, I have a question at the end. When money is not spent on budgeted programs, it has the effect of reducing programs that appear to be funded, but in fact are not. $1 million is not being spent on budgeted programs, which then moves through the end of year process from the transparent budget process to a less transparent process. That's what, John, you were speaking of. In many organizations, you get a promotion or you get poor performance if you fail to spend your budget and to meet your goals and objectives. But it appears, and here's where the appearances come in, it appears our top officials get promoted for
Could you get to your question,
for
please?
not spending. Well, my question is, the comment is, it appears as though everybody that sits up on that board has benefited financially from the kind of behavior that we've been talking about all night. My question is very simple. Frank, will you end this now?
Greg, perhaps you can be more specific. Can you hand on the mic?
I suggest you all work this out after the,
Will you end this discretionary spending now? The things that we've been talking about all night. I mean, I'm wrapping up all the discussion with a simple question. I said it at the beginning. I would make sure it was a question at the end. Frank Principe, will you end this discretionary spending process now, not next year?
Okay. All right. Thank you, Greg. I'm going to go back to my opening remarks where I said 97% of the taxpayer funds appropriated to the Woodbridge District office is spent on operations, salary, and benefits. And the remaining 3% go to some very worthwhile and very small nonprofits. And quite frankly, the cost of cutting a check is probably far greater than the cost of the contribution that we make. And I believe that in instances of a declared disaster like we've had, we need to get funds in the hands of the individuals directly impacted. Something you were very involved with in Tropical Storm Lee. We were able to mitigate the impact of not having a home, not having food, not having health care for 300 individuals. So that's my response, Greg.
Last question.
There are counties all over this state that have faced the same situations, if not worse, and some face them every year and not only once in a while, and they solve this problem in a much more upfront, much more budgeted process. And to say that it's only 3% of the money, or you have yourself a tropical storm you have to take care of it, other counties have figured it out. This one can figure it out. And, why have the controversy? That's what I don't get. It's like going to your sister-in-law's for Thanksgiving dinner and you hate it every year, and all she has to do is cook the turkey rather than keep it raw. Cook the damn turkey and solve the problem.
Next question, please. Last question, please.
I'm Jan Kennard, and I'm from the Occoquan District. And just as background, my late husband and I used to attend every single Board of Supervisors meeting, and we sat on an awful lot of the budget committees for the county. So we watched the process through the years. We watched as a supervisor going out of office dumped, I think it was probably $60,000 to a yacht club, of which he was Commodore. We watched as supervisors gave $1,000 donations to certain large events where they could have their family or their political contributors sit at their table. And as far as attending citizens' time to object to this, the average citizen can't come during the daytime. They're working. And, for the sake of $1,000 or so, they may not figure it's worth it. But the accumulation of it is. My question is, on the Rainbow Center, only Frank had the courage to say no. What is it going to take to get the other supervisors to say no to some of these ridiculous requests? Every year in August, like you were referring to, all of a sudden this mysterious pot of money appears, so there's extra money. That money is given away. It is covered on the agenda after citizens' time, so even if people could speak on it, they don't know about it. So what can we do to get the supervisors to really say no more?
Directed to me, Jan? Yeah. I'm the lucky one?
You are him.
My sense is, Jan, like you do on the Historical Commission, you've got to go talk to each and every supervisor, because I am only 1/8 of the board. I'll give you an example. My office made a small contribution to historic property, Ripon Lodge, for programming. Did that benefit the Woodbridge residents? She said yes. So, sort of catch-22 situation. It does benefit, but clearly we have some in the audience who feel very strongly that, we should turn back all funds and not have that flexibility to deal with the emergent.
You can have the flexibility. Nobody said take the flexibility.
Let me be clearer. Let me put a little sharper point on this. Prince William County's tax rate is 30% lower than all other Northern Virginia jurisdictions, okay? Number one. Number two, we have cut $148 million since I've been in office. Cut $148 million over 4 years and laid off about 135 individuals, county staff. So we have cut services to the bone, okay? And if we have a small amount of influence to give to the Hildebarg Homeless Shelter or to the Axe Homeless Shelter, yeah, I'm going to fight for that.
Again,
I'm going to fight for that.
there are counties that have 30% less budget than Prince William has. that are faced with the same problems that take care of this in a way that is more reasonable and more rational and more open and more transparent and in a budgeted, normal process. So you can make your case for Prince William, and you can say you have 30% less spending today than you did 3 years ago. You can make the same case in Bath County that does it in an open, straightforward, budgeted process. And has a budget that's probably 1/10 the size of Prince William County.
And the population as well.
But they also have floods, they also have rainstorms, they also have food banks that have to be, food banks and a larger percentage of people there that need it than here in Prince William County. So it's not a good argument.
John?
We're going to again disagree on the cutting of 140 some odd $1 million out of the budget. Okay, cutting future spending, okay, that was not budgeted and appropriated is not cutting the budget. Okay, if we had $143 million cut out of the budget, we would have seen at least a 35-cent drop in the real estate tax rate. Okay, we just cut out, we eliminated future spending. What we didn't do, okay, and Frank, as a supervisor, you might have read the actuary report on the Virginia retirement system. Okay, in the last 5 years, we haven't paid $144 million into the pension plan. That's money we will have to pay. We've ignored it. We are now at 100. We've gone over 100%. Everyone talks about the federal debt compared to GDP.
Yes.
All right, the debt that we owe to the Virginia retirement plan is a real tax increase. All right, it's now at 144 million. Cutting out future spending is not a budget cut. It's just cutting out money that we can spend in the future because we don't have the valuations anymore. So I'm going to disagree. That is not a budget cut.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. The boss lady has reserved for herself the last question.
Yes, I'm taking the president's prerogative here, and I'd like to ask our panelists why the Board of Supervisors would take taxpayer funds and spend them on charitable organizations when the taxpayer himself could make donations and, considering that they're probably itemizing, get a tax write-off for it.
Come on, guys.
Anybody?
Anybody?
Program here.
Repeat the question.
Why do we get them?
Yes,
I think you're really kind of looking at me for an answer to that one, because
Any
I
of you.
theoretically am here to, be the nonprofit person. I think you have to be a little bit careful in the use of the word "make a contribution," because it's not a gift. It's not it's a distribution of funds with an expectation of services to be provided that if they were not provided by that nonprofit, they would probably most likely have to be provided by government. And nonprofits have a reputation, well earned over the years, of being able to provide those services at a lower cost. So if you want to run I'll give you an example. Years ago, an RFP was put out from social services to run a winter shelter. And they said that'll be $27,000. And those of us who operated shelters at the time added all the money together, and we said, there is no way in the world you can do that for $27,000. We scraped every penny we could get together, and we said, okay, if you make it 31, we can do that. And they said, no, 27 is the name of the game. And so no one bid. No one bid. In the end, the county had to provide a winter shelter. It cost them over $40,000 to do it. I think that when the money comes to the nonprofits, the money comes with the expectation of services to be provided, almost always measurable, always looking for specific outcomes that get reported and tested after the money's been delivered and spent.
John?
Nonprofits serve a purpose, okay? There's no question. Government is the least efficient user of the taxpayers' dollars. We all know that. Nonprofits can fulfill a service in providing services to the public cheaper than the government can. and more efficiently, I should say, more efficiently. So there is a validity to taxpayer dollars going to it, but it's when it fulfills a function that all taxpayers can take benefit of. So I don't think anybody has a problem with doing that, but it's like everything else. It's the exception, okay, that's causing the problem. It's not the norm, it's the exception. And we're getting to the point where we're doing far more that are exceptions that are becoming the norm that we have to stop.
Well, thank you to all our speakers. You all have articulated your points very well. We appreciate your input.